Hello and welcome, Exiles, to another progress update to the Mana Man. Along with, I've had a lot of people asking, how do I craft gear pieces? And I decided now would be a good time to make a video basically going over every single gear craft piece we do on this build. It's a lot of niche, weird gear, doesn't exist on the market for the most part. And so if you want to play the build, you have to make the gear for a large extent until more people start making the build, and then maybe there will be some stuff that comes on the market. So I figured I'd make a video, try to go over that stuff. Now, first off, I want to go over the upgrades I've made, as this is a bit of a progress update. I'm not going to be going into too much depth, but the upgrades we made today are, 1, I got level 100. 2, I got the Journey of the Mind tattoos, which were a pretty expensive upgrade, but they were worth it. From my rough testing so far, it was roughly a few thousand ES upgrade when I got those. And I got enough currency for one more, 1 passive voices, along with I upgraded a couple more jewels to have the 5 int implicit. I am still missing about 3 or 4 jewels where I do not have the 5 int implicit, and that stuff I'm going to work towards incrementally improving. So we got that done, and then outside of that, I made a upgrade to my ring where I annulled the flat fizz and I got mana on there. And then I also went ahead and recrafted my gloves. I decided it would actually be better single target to have dot multi and the percent damage per int mod on the gloves. I forgot that gloves could roll this mod. It's actually quite a bit of percent damage with our 3,300 int. This is about 100% increased damage plus 20 dot multi. It's actually a lot more damage than I realized. When I thought about percent int originally, I forgot that the percent damage per int mod existed on the glove Eldritch Implicit, which A, makes the gloves easier to craft because you can go for a double fracture and then hollow fossil after the fact. And then B, it is pretty competitive if you consider the fact I was running a dot multi suffix on my jewel here, which was a 8 dot multi, which is effectively 20 dot multi. So you see I lost 20 dot multi here, but I gained 20 dot multi here. And the thing is, I traded out getting essentially about, I don't know, 40 flat int or 5% int. Now 5% int is a little bit higher, but not by much. And ultimately, I think this is a solid damage improvement and worth the trade out from our other gloves, which the other gloves were much harder to craft considering, 1, they were synthesized, so it's much harder to hit the affixes on them, and 2, there's just not many percent synth gloves that are good ES base on the market, and I still think this is competitive / even better than our other pair. So that is the primary upgrades I believe I made on the character. I don't think there's anything else I made since the last video, but I just wanted to go over those real quick. And now let's dive into the meat of the video, which is I have a note section here, which I will include in the POV of this character in the bottom of this video, which goes over all the various crafts. Now to start off with, you'll see I have shield on here. One thing I'm going to say right out the gate is if you're playing this build, you'll notice I have Sublime Vision. I have Sublime Vision, Dawnbreaker. All that stuff is very, very expensive, and it's for one purpose only, and that's to be tanky enough for Voided Valdos. Everything in the base content, like Ubers, etc., you do not need this level of tankiness. This is absurd overkill, and I will say this, doing the Ivory Tower setup where we can go low life, we can click Pain Attunement, that version of the build is 1, going to have higher ES, so you're going to feel cooler, and 2, you're going to deal more damage. So I just want to stress this. You do not need to force in the Sublime Vision stuff like I am doing here. I'm mainly doing it because I'm trying to push that tank level to the extreme, but to play the base game and to have fun playing the base game, this is just really blatant overkill, and quite frankly, in most contexts where voiding isn't on the table, having the higher damage is just better. For the most part, that just works out, and the character's still plenty freaking tanky because you're looking at a character that still has insane ES numbers, and anyways, I just want to stress that right now. Anyways, besides the point, that's why I have the shield craft on here. If you're looking to do a Ivory Tower setup, you want a rare shield instead of the Dawnbreaker. So anyways, the crafts are all going to look a lot similar. For a lot of these crafts, we're using the graveyard, and they're going to follow a pretty similar samey principle. For example, the gloves, boots, and shields, the craft is virtually almost identical, and it all goes the same way. We fracture 4 mods. You want 400% fracture, and the idea here is we're looking for a double fracture. And the way we do this is we fracture 4 mods, and then we split. And I am doing these items as 4 mod items where we are going to increase attribute and mana a bunch. Essentially, we're looking for T1 mana plus T1 int, and that's what we're hoping to hit on the split. And sometimes you'll hit some other affixes that might work as well. For example, you might randomly hit max res, or you might randomly hit, let's just say you hit int plus ES. There's some stuff that will work plenty fine for this build. For example, if you hit the T1 int with a T1 flat defensive mod on the shield, or on the gloves or on the boots or whatever, that still works because you can force on the mana throughout the craft and stuff like that. So this is the ideal fracture, mana plus int, but if you hit some other good combo fractures, you can work with that as well. But anyways, 4 fractures, 1 split, and you might need to increase the item level depending on the item. Boots, you want 86 for T1 movement speed, and shield, you want 86 for T1% ES. Whereas gloves, I think 84 is fine for all the mods you need to hit. 1012 mod rating is the way to guarantee T1 mana, because mana has like 12 tiers in most of the gear slots, but you might need to recheck that. But 1012, I'm pretty sure, is the correct number there. And then you're doing something like 1000 to 2000% increase of attribute and mana. Those are the mods we're trying to target. And then if you're doing a boot craft, you want to target speed as well, because speed is a pretty dang good hit. If you hit 35 movement speed, it'll be A, resellable, or B, great for you to craft the boots as well. And then on top of that, you're just essentially targeting a scarcer mod on every possible mod that has an affix you can target on the gear slot. You want at least 300%. This essentially is lowering everything else to very low mod weighting, and then increasing the mods we care about way to the moon. So every time you hit the craft button, you're going to get those mods, and you're just kind of RNG rolling mostly. Is the split going to give me the correct double fracture on them? That is the idea. So that is the method we were doing for the boot and glove crafts. And then, of course, you could quality it beforehand with the graveyard if you have the slots to put on the quality corpses. They're really cheap and really common corpses. Or you can perfect fossil them afterwards. That is up to you. But perfect fossils are kind of expensive. Outside of that, for the gloves of the boots, it's always going to be basically sanctified plus hollow plus dense. And essentially, you want to do this until you hit mods you're satisfied with. For me personally, I was plenty happy to hit T1 ES and then benchcraft percent ES, because that gives me close to the max roll of ES I can get on these. I can get a little bit better with the T1% ES roll, but it's much harder to hit. It would be the difference of being like a 210 ES pair of gloves like I have here, and like a 230 or something like that is roughly around the vague difference you make from having a double T1 versus T1 plus benchcraft. Same thing with the boots, except for the boots, you're not going for 2 ES mods, you're going for movement speed plus mana plus an ES mod. That's a little bit of a slight change because movement speed is just king, and that's what you want to aim for. So that is going for the glove, boots, and as for the shield, it's a little bit slightly different. It's either you dense fossil spam for getting the double T1 ES mods plus the mana plus the int, or you can do the other method I used while crafting my rare shield when I went to do it, which was I did a reforge more likely. I did reforge defense until I hit either percent or flat, and then I put on benchcrafted the other, and then I did a reforge more likely. The reason for that is I didn't need a hollow fossil on the shield, which you could do a hollow fossil on the shield, in which case you can't do the reforge more likely method. But for the shield specifically, since there are already multiple fractures on there, when you dense fossil spam, you're not always guaranteed to get like a 5 mod affix item or a 4 mod affix item. So I was just trying to increase my likelihood, or basically guaranteeing those affix would be re-put back on there. Because the way reforge more likely works is it will copy the same amount of affixes. So for example, if you have 2 prefixes and you do a reforge more likely, it will always give you back 2 prefixes. Even if it doesn't roll you the percent ES plus the flat ES, it will give you back those 2 prefixes. So essentially, when I was crafting this, I had a triple fractured shield, which if you dense fossil spam, about 50% of your rolls are going to hit a 4 mod item, which will never give you double T1 ES, because I had fractured res, int, and mana, so I couldn't hit that. Anyways, the point is I could force it to always be a 5 mod item where the reforge is more likely. So that's what this is. For the most part, though, just dense fossil spam. If you have a double fracture, it should work fine. Outside of that, looking into more crafts, the graveyard craft, I went for a triple fracture here, essentially trying to get flat mana, flat int, and then if you high roll and hit fire dot multi, that's insane. Very unlikely, very hard to target. But if you hit hybrid mana, that is what I hit, and that is ideal. You could also hit percent damage, which would be good as well. Or you could hit some garbage third prefix, which you can work with, and it's fine. But those are the type of affixes working for. So we do a 6 fracture item, and then we split it. And we are making this a 15%, 100% increase attribute. And then we're making basically everything else scarce. The idea here is mana on the suffix pool. If we increase mana, we increase the likelihood to get mana regen rate, which we don't want. We increase the likelihood to get mana gained on kill, which we don't want. And so I decided to just not increase mana. And the mana mod still has a very high likelihood to occur because of how many things we're able to reduce on the prefix pool. Its mod weighting compared to the other things is still quite high. So you're still pretty likely to hit T1 flat mana on this without increasing the likelihood of hitting the thing you don't want, which is mana on kill and mana regen on the suffix pool. Outside of that, you add 1 Conqueror influence. The reason for this is Eventually, we want to awaken orb or fractured item to put the damage per int mod onto the wand. Effectively, if you hit a warlord item and say you have like two fractured suffixes and a fractured prefix, then you could awaken orb warlord burn damage with the hunter percent damage per int. If you had two prefixes and you had a hunter item, you could go for a awaken orb with malevolence dot multi, awakening orbing with 1% per 16 int on elder mod, as it's either an elder mod or a hunter mod for the 1% per 16, and then benchcraft to finish your affix. Those are those types of your options. If you're not running the ivory tower setup, you're not running malevolence, then you don't do that, obviously, but you get the idea. The point is you want to awaken orb the 1% per 16 int mod, and then you want to follow up with doing something like a previous can't be changed, reforge fire, veiled chaos, and then benchcraft for your final mod. That's kind of the idea for the weapon craft. For the helical ring, it's a pretty simple process of you are using Essence of Delirium until you get basically a top roll of the dot multi. You want to fracture that, and every time you miss the fracture, you need to clean the base with a vendor recipe, which is an augment orb, a helical with T3 or lower chaos res, which you do a reforge chaos until you have T3 or lower chaos res, and then you do an amethyst flask. And that should, when you put it into the vendor recipe, when you go to sell it to the vendor, it should display that you are going to get in return a magic helical base with a higher tier chaos res, because this recipe essentially upgrades the chaos res and it cleans the base. It takes the fracture off, so you can attempt the fracture again. If for whatever reason you put on a gilded fossil, you are just screwed and you cannot clean the base with a vendor recipe because the gilded fossil recipe will override it. And that is on you for doing that. Do not put gilded fossil on your helical base, and do not buy a base that has a gilded fossil already on it. That is the item sells for more to a vendor implicit mod. So avoid that if you can. Outside of that, once you hit the fracture, you're essentially doing an Essence of Spite, which is the int essence, until you hit either T1 all attributes, T1 chaos res, or mana. And then I have a step, depending on which one of these you hit, will change how you try to go for the finish. The ideal outcome for this ring is int, T1, or essence int, T1 chaos res, and then either T1 all attributes or T1 mana. They are roughly comparable. Both of them have pretty good bench crafts. So for example, if you hit T1 mana and T1 chaos res and T1 int, bench crafting all attribute is only like 5 attributes lower than the other one. And versus if you have mana bench crafted, it's about 20 flat mana lower than the other mana craft. So they are pretty comparable in power, and both of them will work fine. Just follow the steps here. Outside of that, Simplex craft, this is essentially an Awakener orb plus imprint craft. The way this works is you buy an item level 80 or higher Simplex with either 1 or no influence. You add Crusader, or you reroll influence so you have Crusader. Then you chaos or fundamental fossil spam until you hit percent int. You annul off the extra affixes, and once it's percent int by itself, if you craft suffixes can't be changed and scour, it will turn it into a magic version of the Simplex amulet with percent int on it, which you can then imprint, and then you can go through a process of Awakener orbing with percent attribute amulets with the Shaper. And every time you do that, you'll get a 3 mod Simplex back. Most likely the third mod is going to be a prefix. That is garbage. Well, it will be a prefix. Whether or not it's garbage is up for debate. Like if you randomly awaken orb into percent damage per int, then you won, right? But most likely it's going to be garbage, in which case you need to annul. Every time you miss the annul, you need to go back to the imprint, and you need to go again. Once you hit the annul and you just have percent attribute, percent int, and an open prefix on a Shaper Crusader Simplex, you then do a suffixes can't be changed and reforge influence. Is about a 1 in 11 roughly to hit the 1% or 1% per 15 int mod, which on a Simplex goes to 2% per 15. That is the Simplex craft. You can also just buy it off trade. A lot of times that works too. If for whatever reason this amulet gets more than a mirror in cost to craft, which normally it won't be, you can always message me in game and I will mirror it for no fee. Anyways, outside of that, helmet craft, use a graveyard to get a fracture print mod. This is either you do the settle version, where essentially you choose an evasion base or an armor base or evasion armor hybrid base. And the reason for that is you get rid of the possibility to roll mana. The big difficult thing that makes this mod so incredibly hard to roll is it shares a mod group with the flat mana. That means they cannot both occur at the same time. They're competing to exist on the item. And mana has 1,000 weight, and this mana per int mod at base has 100 weight. So effectively, the way you could target it is if it's on an evasion or armor base, the mana mod doesn't exist, and you can just increase the chance of a mana modifier by a bunch, and that is a pretty easy way to force it if you're doing those base. But unfortunately, that base, number one, doesn't get you ES, and number two, it also shares some level of competition for int/dex. So if you're going for a double fracture, there's a chance you fracture int or fracture dex or fracture strength which is also not ideal for if the double fracture scenario. But the main thing is the settle version, you can do an evasion or armor base. It is fine. You will lose like 1,000 to 2,000 ES on your character, but when you're talking about a character that gets 40,000 energy shield, losing 2,000 energy shield isn't the end of the world, and you can work with a settle. It's better to have a decent settle helmet than a bad hubris version of the helmet. Anyways, so you roll for either the mana per hit mod on an evasion armor base, or you do this sort of craft method where you target a bunch of increased haunted modifier, and then you're decreasing every other mod in the pool, and you're just praying you hit that mod. Because essentially, it's very hard to target because you can't increase mana a bunch because that just increases the mod that will take over the pool. And you can't, you have to increase the haunted modifier a bunch because it's 100 base weighting, which means even if you make everything else quite a bit scarcer, you still have a pretty high, it's still pretty hard to hit. So that is the idea here. So you increase haunted buff a bunch. Now, there are two schools of thought. When it comes to Graveyard, there is my belief, which I have begun to believe from doing a lot of crafts with Graveyard, that the increases in scarcers are effectively increases and reductions where they are additive with each other. Essentially, for example, if I put 300% scarcer with 2,000% increased haunted modifier, this will just be a net 1,700% increase to the chance to hit the mana per int mod. That is my belief. That being said, on Craft of Exile and probably PODB, they have the scarcer mod as a multiplier, which effectively means it would multiply, or it would increase the mod by 20 times, and then it would divide it by 4 or 3 or whatever, right? That is the crux of the issue. If you think it's multiplicative, then you don't want the scarcer mod. If you think it's additive, then you want the scarcer mod because it makes it disproportionately much more likely that you will hit the mana per int mod over flat mana. That is my little spiel on that. I haven't been able to 100% prove one way or the other, but I believe it's additive just from my experience with the crafting. You can make up your own mind on what you think it is, whether or not scarcer is and just a direct reduction or a direct increase. I don't know for sure, to be honest. Outside of all of that, you want to add 2 explicits. The reason for this is it's very hard to hit the mana per int mod because it's competing with its other haunted modifiers. There are 3 other haunted prefixes that all have 250 or higher weighting, which is over 2.5 times as much likelihood to be hit. And then as well as that, there is also the issue with, there's just a lot of mod weighting to compete with when you have a base 100 weight mod, and 2,000% increase only makes it a 2k weight mod. So it's just a very hard playing field to hit this mod. And so my plan is going for a 6 mod item, a 6 explicit item, going for 4 out fractures, and then going for split. And this is just a pretty RNG process, but eventually you will hit the mana per int mod fracture. And when you do, you are effectively either A, going to just awaken or orbit with a hunter helmet and then do some sort of fundamental fossil spam or essence of spite spam until you hit %int, or B, maybe you hit the best case scenario where you hit T1 int fractured with the mana mod, in which case you can do an awakener orb with %int and some other useful affix like mana reservation efficiency on Redeemer, like minus fire res on Warlord. You have those sorts of options for yourself. And you're going to end up always finishing this craft with a bench craft where you are bench crafting flat int, Fizz Taken Fire, or you're crafting an ES mod, depending on how you go about the craft. But the main hardest thing of this whole craft is just hitting the mana per int fracture. And this is the recommended affix kind of targeting you want to go for. Outside of that, the final item to craft is the Grasping Mail. This has some very difficult issues. Number one is, if you're going to go Grasping Mail, you need Fire Pen plus Chaos Camp Bypass, and that is just mandatory. If you're going to do this rare chess piece, I would not recommend it unless you're doing Sublime Vision and you're full committing. So just going to put that out there. If you're doing it, you need to hit big. Otherwise, just use the Ivory Tower. It'll work fine. So anyways, as for hitting big, there is a few issues. Number one is the Fire Camp Pen mod is very low weighting. So to target it, unfortunately, it has the exact same tags as Fire Res. And effectively what this means is we just have to accept we're going to hit Fire Res on the item, because in order to get this mod to occur, you have to do a bunch of increased fire. And that's really the only good way I can see of getting the mod to just occur on the item. Outside of that, number two is, the other problem is the mod we want to hit it with, the Chaos Camp Bypass, is a Chaos mod. And that's the only tag it has. And in order for us to increase the likelihood of that, we also are increasing the likelihood of a couple other Grasping Mail mods, which are Minion Poison and the fire gain is extra mod, which also shares the fire tag as well, and we're increasing fire a lot. Luckily, the fire gain is chaos is a base 300 weight, so when you do 1,000% increase chaos and 5,000% increase fire, what ends up happening is you get a 60 times 300 versus a 10 times 100, which makes them still relatively similar weights in the whole grand scheme of thing, which doesn't feel too bad. But that's the rough idea. Essentially, what happens is Grasping Male is always guaranteed to roll 1 Grasping Male mod. It cannot roll 2, and you're just kind of RNGing which Grasping Male mod you hit. You're hoping for the Chaos Can't Bypass, but it will vary. I would think at this point, I believe a 4 explicit item is the best way to go, and go for a 4 fracture and split, and you're just kind of praying on the RNG you hit the correct fractures. That is my approach, and then you want to decrease a lot of the other mods. I went real heavy on lightning and cold, by the way, because I essentially don't want the lightning and cold gain as extra to be significant weights in the pool, and because I believe it is additive, this is the way to go. If it is multiplicative though, you probably can go with a lower percent. Anyways, that is the idea. If you want to increase the item level for 22 suppress, you can. 6% attribute will get you a higher ES pool. 22 suppress gives you the route to go for a bit more tankiness. That's up to you. Anyways, hopefully this goes over all of the big crafts for this character: the Grasping Male craft, the helmet craft, the boots, the rare shield if you go to make a rare shield, the weapon craft, and the Helical and the Simplex. I say all this because I want to help people that want to copy the build and the items don't really exist on the market, as well as I am considering trying to do a version that is a lot more budget friendly. Right now, this version is well over 2,000 to 3,000 divines of basically all the currency I made, all league I've invested into this character, and that is a very hard number to hit. That being said, I believe the build can be played on like pretty decently on much closer to the 100 to 200 divine currency range. Now that's still quite a bit more expensive than a lot of people can afford, and I realize that, but that's about the range in which I would start to recommend, hey, you could probably play this build and it'd probably be pretty fun. So I'm thinking about potentially doing a setting up that sort of style version, is that more closer to 100 200E version, which would make a lot more people eligible to play a decent version of the build. So I might do that at some point, but before then, my next project for the craft is going to be making what I consider the mirror tier version of this helmet, which would be a elevated fire, minus fire res, elevated percent int, T1 int, mana per int mod, elevated fizz taken as fire, and then probably bench crafted ES or Helical locked T1 ES. We'll see how that goes depending on where the finances are. But that's my next project that I'm trying to make, so that way people that are doing the high-end version and want to have a way to get the perfect helmet, I will do that, and we'll set it up for a free mirror service. But that's the goals right now. I'm trying to make the helmet. That's what I'll be doing on stream today. And then later on, maybe in the next stream afterwards, I will do what essentially is making a budget version of the build. Budget being, probably 100, 200D. Because the build, I don't really think I'd recommend on just completely scuffed gear. Because you really, when you're doing these sorts of stacker builds, it's kind of like this exponential scaling where the more you put into it, every tiny little upgrade you make makes a bigger and bigger and bigger difference. And if you're just too low on the threshold, the build hasn't ever taken off and doesn't really exist in terms of like viability. So anyways, that's the plans. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the progress of this build, and we'll continue to do it. Hopefully I don't void, because in order for me to make money to fund this character, I'm doing a lot of voided maps. So fingers crossed I could keep pushing it without dying. We will see. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out.